The grand military council chamber of the Zentharian Empire buzzed with barely contained laughter. Displayed on the massive holographic screen before them was footage of what these advanced beings considered the most ridiculous excuse for combat training they had ever witnessed Earth's military exercises. Commander Vex'tar stood at attention, his silver-scaled skin reflecting the blue glow of the projection as he watched his fellow council members practically falling out of their hovering seats. High General Kraz Tech wiped tears from his third eye, pointing at the screen where human soldiers were conducting hand-to-hand combat drills. "Look at these primitives," Kraz Tech's voice boomed through the chamber. "They still practice fighting with their actual limbs. When was the last time any civilized species engaged in physical combat?" The footage switched to Marines practicing marksmanship with projectile weapons. This elicited another round of raucous laughter from the assembled alien military leaders. Admiral Yearn, her tentacles writhing in amusement, gestured at the screen with one of her upper appendages. "Projectile weapons? Really? These humans are still throwing tiny pieces of metal at each other." She turned to Commander Vex'tar. "Commander, you've been unusually quiet during this briefing. Surely you see the humor in this species' pathetic attempts at military advancement." Vex'tar cleared his throat, his military training barely containing his own amusement. "While I agree their methods seem antiquated, I would caution against complete dismissal of any potential threat. The humans have shown remarkable." "Threat," General Kraz Tech interrupted, setting off another wave of laughter. "Commander, I appreciate your diplomatic approach, but let's be realistic. Their most advanced space vessels can barely reach their own moon. Their combat suits don't even have gravitational stabilizers. And their weapons? They still rely on gunpowder. The council chamber erupted in fresh howls of amusement. Even the usually stoic guard Captain Parthon was chuckling, her crystalline exoskeleton tinkling with each laugh. "Very well," Vex'tar conceded, allowing a small smile to cross his face. "Perhaps I am being overly cautious. The footage does make their capabilities seem rather limited." High General Kraz Tech stood, his massive frame casting a shadow across the chamber floor. Then it settled. "Earth's military poses no significant threat to our expansion plans. Commander Vex'tar, you will lead the observation team. Document their quaint military practices for our Academy's primitive warfare course. It should provide our cadets with some much-needed entertainment." Vex'tar bowed slightly, his ceremonial armor catching the light. "As you command, High General. Though if I may make one suggestion, perhaps we should at least study their tactical." "Oh, come now," Commander Admiral Yearn interrupted. "Next you'll suggest we should fear their naval capabilities because they've mastered the art of floating on water." The chamber once again filled with laughter, but this time Vex'tar didn't join in. Something about the intensity in the human soldier's eyes in that training footage nagged at him. Still, orders were orders, and he had a mission to prepare for. As the council members filed out, still chuckling about Earth's primitive military, none of them noticed the small detail in the corner of the footage: a Marine sergeant taking down 3 training drones with nothing but a combat knife and what appeared to be a rolled-up piece of paper. Commander Vex'tar stood on the bridge of the Zez Overlord, a state-of-the-art scout vessel hovering just beyond Jupiter's orbit. His crew had been watching the approaching human patrol ships for the past 30 minutes, and like the council meeting from earlier, the bridge was filled with poorly suppressed snickers. Commander Navigation Officer Real XA called out, not even trying to hide her amusement. "These human vessels are moving at barely 1/10 light speed. At this rate, they'll reach our position in approximately 20 Earth minutes. Look at their hull design." Lieutenant Mex Vor added from his weapons station, zooming in on the nearest human ship. "They're still using metal plating. Actual, physical metal." He tapped his screen with each word for emphasis. "Not even a basic energy shield in sight." Vex'tar watched the approaching vessels with professional interest. 3 human ships, designated as Marine Space Patrol vessels according to their intelligence, were moving in a triangle formation. Their design was indeed primitive by Zentharian standards, blocky, utilitarian, and about 1/4 the size of his scout ship. "Maintaining course," Commander Real XA asked, still grinning. "Or should we move closer and give them a proper first contact shock?" Before Vex'tar could respond, Warning Officer Tuxnil suddenly straightened in her seat. "Commander, the human vessels are wait. This can't be right." "Report," Vex'tar ordered, noting the confusion in her voice. "They're accelerating." but not using their main engines. They're venting atmosphere in coordinated bursts. It's changing their trajectory in a way our targeting systems can't predict. Lieutenant Vex'tar scoffed. Using atmosphere venting for maneuvering? How desperate. Our weapons systems can easily compensate for such basic. A massive impact rocked the ZES Overlord, sending several crew members stumbling. Warning lights flashed across every console. What just happened? Vex'tar demanded, regaining his footing. Impossible, Vex'tar shouted, his fingers flying across his console. They fired projectiles, simple kinetic weapons, but the trajectory they used the venting to curve their shots around Jupiter's magnetic field. Another impact shook the ship. Tuxnil's voice rose in panic. Hull breach in sections 7 through 9. The projectiles they're carrying some kind of magnetic disruptor. Our internal gravity is failing. Vex'tar grabbed his command console as artificial gravity flickered. Return fire. Target there. We can't, Vex'tar interrupted, real fear in his voice now. Our targeting systems are calibrated for energy weapons and lightspeed combat. These humans are fighting like primitives, Vex'tar finished, a cold realization dawning. Because that's exactly what we assumed they were. The bridge crew watched in horror as the 3 human vessels split their formation. 2 continued their erratic, atmosphere-powered dance, drawing their targeting system's attention. But the 3rd ship, by the 7 suns, Relaxe whispered, they're not going to. The 3rd marine vessel cut its engines completely. Using Jupiter's gravity, it slingshot straight toward them, closing the distance faster than their computers could calculate an effective response. All hands, brace for impact, Vex'tar shouted. But instead of a collision, their sensors detected multiple small objects launching from the approaching vessel. Marines, Tuxnil screamed. They're launching Marines. In personal spacesuits. Vex'tar watched, mouth agape, as dozens of suited figures shot through space toward his ship. Their trajectory was perfect, straight through the hull breaches caused by the initial attack. He'd assumed humans were primitive because they still trained in hand-to-hand combat. Now he realized, with growing dread, that they had never stopped practicing close combat because they had mastered it. The first impact of magnetic boots on his ship's hull sent shivers through the deck plates. Warning sirens blared as multiple hull breaches were reported. Through the bridge windows, Vex'tar caught glimpses of suited figures moving with practiced precision, cutting through his ship's outer defenses like they'd trained for this their entire lives. Which, he now realized with dawning horror, they probably had. Send word to the council, he ordered, drawing his ceremonial sidearm and realizing, far too late, that it might actually see combat use. The humans are not primitive. They're not primitive at all. The sound of cutting torches echoed through the ship's corridors, getting closer to the bridge. The Marines were coming. The first explosion rocked the bridge doors of the ZES Overlord, sending waves of panic through the Zentharian crew. Commander Vex'tar had positioned his security teams in what he thought was an impenetrable defensive formation. But as the smoke cleared and a figure stepped through the wreckage, he realized just how wrong he'd been. Staff Sergeant Alexandra Rodriguez moved like liquid metal through the doorway, her spacesuit's magnetic boots clicking against the deck with predatory precision. The Marines called her Thunder not because she was loud, but because by the time you heard her, it was already too late. Fascinating primitive design, she commented, her voice carrying through the ship's atmosphere with unnerving calm. Her helmet's visor reflected the terrified faces of the bridge crew. You put all your faith in energy shields and forgot the basics of physical armor. Lieutenant Vex'tar raised his energy pistol, his hand shaking. Stay back, human. Our weapons are far superior to your primitive. The movement was so fast that Vex'tar's third eye couldn't track it. One moment, Rodriguez was by the door. The next, she had crossed the bridge, disarmed Vex'tar, and used his own momentum to send him flying into a console. The energy pistol spun through the air, and she caught it without looking. Superior weapons, she said, examining the pistol before casually tossing it aside, are only superior if you can hit your target. Warning Officer Tuxnil lunged forward with a stun baton, the weapon crackling with enough electricity to drop a Zentharian warrior. Rodriguez didn't even break stride. She grabbed a loose piece of metal debris, used it to catch the baton's charge, and then swept Tuxnil's legs out from under her with a move that seemed to defy the artificial gravity. Your combat training assumes everyone fights with advanced technology, Rodriguez explained, almost like a teacher giving a lesson. We train for everything, including no-tech scenarios. 3 more security officers rushed her from different angles. Vex'tar allowed himself a moment of hope. No single warrior could handle a coordinated attack from multiple Zentharian elite guards. But Rodriguez proved him wrong again. She used her suit's magnetic boots to suddenly lock onto the deck plate, becoming an immovable pivot point. The first guard's charge became a perfect lever as she redirected his momentum into the second guard. Both went down in a tangle of limbs. The third guard fired his stun weapon, but Rodriguez had already moved, flowing like water around the energy burst. "You know what's funny?" she asked, engaging in hand-to-hand combat with moves that seemed impossibly fluid for someone in a spacesuit. "Your intelligence probably showed you our training videos, watched us practice these exact moves, but you dismissed them as primitive." More Marines were flooding onto the bridge now, securing terminals and disarming the crew with ruthless efficiency. But Vex'tar couldn't take his eyes off Rodriguez. She moved with a confidence that bordered on supernatural, adapting instantly to the ship's failing artificial gravity. When a power surge caused gravity to suddenly reverse, most of the bridge crew panicked. Rodriguez simply adjusted her boot's magnetic field and continued fighting as if the ceiling had always been the floor. She intercepted a guard trying to reach the emergency controls, redirected his punch into a graceful spin that would have been beautiful if it wasn't so deadly, and pinned him with a move that worked regardless of gravitational orientation. "Commander Vex'tar," she said, turning to face him while effortlessly subduing the last guard. "I believe this is the part where we discuss surrender terms." Vex'tar found his voice, even as his worldview crumbled around him. "How? How did you know who I was?" Rodriguez's helmet tilted slightly. "We studied you. Every piece of intel, every scrap of information about Zentharian command structures and cultural markers. While you were laughing at our primitive ways, we were learning everything about you." A sudden explosion rocked the ship. Rodriguez's response was instantaneous. She grabbed Vex'tar and pulled him behind a console just as debris scattered across the bridge. Without missing a beat, she used her suit's built-in medical scanner to check him for injuries. "Your ship's power core is destabilizing," she reported, her tone remaining professional. "Those primitive projectiles we fired? They weren't just for breaching the hull. They carried programmable nanites designed specifically to disrupt Zentharian power systems." Vex'tar stared at her, his understanding of warfare shifting fundamentally. You combined basic kinetic weapons with advanced technology." "We use whatever works," Rodriguez answered, helping him up. "Old tech, new tech, no tech. The tools don't make the warrior, Commander. The mind does." As if to emphasize her point, the ship's lights flickered and died, plunging the bridge into darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in a red glow. Rodriguez simply switched her visor's mode and continued securing the bridge as if nothing had changed. "I have to know," Vex'tar said, watching her coordinate the Marine teams with silent hand signals that seemed far more efficient than their advanced communication systems. That footage of the Marine taking down 3 training drones with a knife and a rolled paper. Was that you? For the first time, Rodriguez laughed. "No, sir. That was one of our rookies. In basic training." The implications of that statement hit Vex'tar harder than any physical blow could have. The bridge of the Zess Overlord shuddered as 5 Zentharian warships emerged from hyperspace, their massive forms blocking out the stars. Commander Vex'tar watched Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's reaction carefully, expecting to finally see concern break through her professional demeanor. Instead, she smiled. "Right on schedule," she said, checking her suit's chronometer. "Your reinforcements have excellent timing, Commander." Warning Officer Tux Neal, now under Marine Guard, couldn't contain her relief. "You're finished now, humans. Those are Devastator-class warships. Each one carries enough firepower to level a small moon," Rodriguez interrupted. "We know. Did you think we'd start this operation without accounting for your standard response protocols?" A new voice crackled through the ship's communication system. "This is High Admiral Krenthax of the Zentharian Empire. Release our vessel or face immediate annihilation. You have 30 seconds to comply." Vex'tar watched Rodriguez key her own communication panel with practiced ease. "This is Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, United States Marine Corps. Perhaps you'd like to check your ship's power readings first." The bridge fell silent. Then, panic erupted across the emergency channels as the massive warships suddenly lost power, their lights flickering out one by one. The mighty Devastator-class vessels, pride of the Zentharian fleet, hung dead in space. "Those nanites we used," Rodriguez explained to a stunned Vex'tar. "They weren't just in our projectiles. Your ship's communication array has been broadcasting the shutdown code to every Zentharian vessel in range for the past 10 minutes. Vex'tar's military mind raced ahead. "The reinforcement call you let us make it. Better to deal with your ships here, on our terms, than to have them stumble across Earth later." Rodriguez nodded to one of her Marines, who pulled up a tactical display. "Look familiar, Commander." The display showed a perfect recreation of Zentharian fleet combat protocols. Every response, every standard formation, every tactical decision their reinforcements had made was mapped out with precision. "While your council was laughing at our hand-to-hand combat footage," Rodriguez continued, "other teams were analyzing your ship designs, protocols, and tactical doctrines. Your automation, your AI targeting systems, your power distribution networks, they're all incredibly advanced, and all incredibly predictable." A new alarm blared. Through the bridge windows, Vex'tar watched in astonishment as human vessels emerged from behind Jupiter's larger moons. They'd been there the whole time, using the magnetic fields and radiation belts for cover. Classic ambush tactics, executed with devastating precision. "Your ships relied on advanced sensors," Rodriguez explained. "Ours trained to work with basic visual confirmation and timing. Right now, your mighty warships are floating in space, their crews unable to even open their manual airlock controls because they never trained for full power loss scenarios." More Marines arrived on the bridge, bringing reports of the ship's complete capture. Not a single human casualty. Vex'tar found himself nodding with growing professional respect. The projectile weapons, the hand-to-hand combat training, the physical backup systems he mused aloud. It wasn't primitive at all, was it? You maintained the old ways while mastering the new. Humans learned long ago not to depend solely on our most advanced technology, Rodriguez confirmed. Every Marine learns to fight with everything from their bare hands to the latest weapons systems, because you never know when you'll need to switch between them. Through the windows, Vex'tar watched human boarding teams approaching the dead warships. Their movements were precise, coordinated, and somehow beautiful in their simplicity. No wasted energy, no over-reliance on technology, just pure, practiced skill. "And now?" he asked, already suspecting the answer. "Now," Rodriguez replied, "your crews will receive a first-hand demonstration of why Marines still train in close-quarters combat. Though I doubt they'll enjoy the lesson as much as your military council enjoyed laughing at our training videos." The first reports from the warships started coming in. The human boarding teams were moving through the corridors with textbook precision. Centuries of refined combat doctrine, preserved and enhanced rather than discarded, were being demonstrated with devastating effect. "I need to report this to the council," Vex'tar said quietly. "Everything we assumed about human warfare was wrong. You never abandoned the old ways. You just layered the new ways on top of them." Rodriguez nodded. "The deadliest weapon in any war, Commander, isn't the most advanced. It's the most versatile." As if to prove her point, the lights on the bridge flickered again. Without hesitation, every Marine switched to alternative protocols, their movements never faltering. They had trained for this, Vex'tar realized. They had trained for everything. The Zentharian Defense Station Apex 7 hung against the backdrop of Jupiter's swirling storms, its crystalline structure bristling with weapon systems. High General Krastek had arrived personally to deal with the human threat, turning the station into a fortress. But as Commander Vex'tar watched from the captured bridge of the Overlord, he already knew it wouldn't be enough. "Your station's defenses are impressive," Rodriguez commented, studying the tactical display. "Automated targeting systems, energy shields, gravity wells, all controlled by your most advanced AI. Which means they're vulnerable," Vex'tar found himself saying, earning surprised looks from his fellow Zentharians. "Because we designed them to counter advanced threats, not, what did you call it?" "Back to basics," Rodriguez finished with a nod. She turned to her team. "Time to show them old school." The Marine assault began with something so simple that the station's advanced defenses didn't even register it as a threat. Hundreds of small, metallic objects, barely larger than coins, drifted toward the station. Space Junk Kraz Tech's voice boomed over the command channel. "This is your attack." The objects struck the station's shields, which easily deflected them. But as they bounced off, they released clouds of metallic dust. The station's energy shields, designed to repel concentrated energy attacks, tried to adjust to the countless tiny particles. Within seconds, the shield grid was overwhelmed, trying to track millions of microscopic threats simultaneously. Sometimes Rodriguez explained to Vex'tar, the simplest solution is the most effective. With the shields compromised, marine drop pods launched from hidden positions. The station's targeting systems, still struggling with the dust cloud, couldn't lock onto the incoming troops. Rodriguez led the charge, her pod striking the station's outer hull with surgical precision. The battle inside the station proved why Marines never stopped training in close combat. The crystalline corridors, designed for beauty and efficiency, became killing grounds. Not from advanced weapons, but from trained warriors who understood how to use the environment itself as a weapon. Rodriguez faced off against Kraz Tech himself in the station's central control room. The High General towered over her, his powered combat armor humming with energy. "Your primitive tactics end here," he snarled, activating his armor's advanced weapon systems. Rodriguez responded by throwing a handful of the metallic dust into the air. The particles were drawn into his armor's intake vents, designed to process the vacuum of space, but not find particulate matter. As his system stuttered, she closed the distance. What followed was a display of combat mastery that left even Vex'tar in awe. Rodriguez moved like water, using Kraz Tech's size and strength against him. Every attempted grab was turned into a throw. Every powered strike met empty air as she flowed around him, striking at joints and weak points. "You rely too much on your armor," she said, executing a perfect shoulder throw that sent the massive alien crashing into a control panel. "We train to fight in everything from powered suits to nothing at all." The station's artificial gravity suddenly reversed a last-ditch defensive protocol. But while Kraz Tech's armor struggled to compensate, Rodriguez had already magnetically locked her boots. She launched herself from floor to ceiling, using the gravity shift to add momentum to her strikes. "Impossible," Kraz Tech gasped as his armor's systems finally failed completely. "How can you adapt so quickly?" "Because we never stopped practicing," Rodriguez answered, disabling his armor's power core with a precise strike. "While you were laughing at our primitive training, we were preparing for everything." The battle ended not with advanced energy weapons or sophisticated AI tactics, but with a Marine executing a perfect joint lock on a High General of the Zentharian Empire. As Kraz Tech submitted, Rodriguez helped him up with professional courtesy. "Your technology is impressive," she told him, "but technology should enhance a warrior's capabilities, not replace them." Vex'tar watched as other Marines secured the station, moving with the same practiced efficiency they'd shown since the beginning. They'd defeated the pride of the Zentharian fleet not through superior technology, but through the perfect integration of old and new, mind and machine, tradition and innovation. The Grand Military Council chamber was eerily quiet now, a stark contrast to the laughter that had filled it just days before. Commander Vex'tar stood before his fellow council members, many of whom still bore the bruises from their encounters with Marine close-quarter combat techniques. High General Kraz Tech, his pride more wounded than his body, cleared his throat. "Commander Vex'tar, your after-action report mentions that we should revise our combat training protocols." Immediately Vex'tar responded, bringing up a holographic display. "The humans have shown us that true military superiority comes not from having the most advanced technology, but from mastering combat at every level." Admiral yearned that rubbed her tentacles, still sore from where Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had used them as impromptu climbing ropes. The way they combined simple physical attacks with advanced tactics, it was like watching ancient warfare and cutting-edge strategy merge into something entirely new. "And terrifyingly effective," Guard Captain Parthon added, her crystalline exoskeleton showing web-like cracks from a Marine's precisely targeted pressure point strikes. Vex'tar gestured to the same training footage they had laughed at earlier. "Look again at their hand-to-hand combat drills. They never stopped practicing the basics, never grew overconfident in their technology. While we were busy mocking their primitive methods, they were perfecting the art of adaptation." The council watched in respectful silence as the footage played. What they had once seen as amusing now appeared dangerous, efficient, and carefully preserved combat wisdom. Perhaps Kraz Tech mused, absently rubbing his still aching shoulder. It is we who have been primitive, assuming that advancement meant abandoning the old ways entirely. Vex'tar smiled slightly. As Staff Sergeant Rodriguez told me, the deadliest weapon isn't the most advanced, it's the most versatile. And the humans? They might just be the most versatile warriors in the galaxy. As the Council began drafting new training protocols that would incorporate both old and new combat techniques, Vex'tar caught himself reaching for his datapad with his left hand. His right arm was still stiff from where Rodriguez had demonstrated why Marines still practice joint locks. Some lessons, he reflected, were best learned the hard way.